rainforests. A rainforest is such a complex object that you need to bring all three of these reasoning styles to understand it. So only that particular brand of scientists, the ecologist or the ecosystem ecologist, needs all three together, which shows you that they are something that is ripe for philosophical thinking, because they have existed separately, but once you bring them together, new things come along. And this is what we need to do today. How Deleuze uses this. And remember what the aim of this morning's class is: to get rid of Aristotelian essences. In other words, we need to think about what guarantees the mind-independent identity being the key word here, of the world. That's the question we want to answer this morning. Because without answering that question, we cannot move anywhere else. There will still be doubts in your mind. If I don't answer this question first, there will be doubts in your mind as to whether, hey, is really the mind have nothing to do with what gives that mountain other its identity? Remember, that mountain's been there for thousands of years. It has had an identity that has been there for many human generations. And it's an identity that supplies you with an obstacle. If you are the invading French armies in the 15th century guided by Charles VIII, in other words, the first French armies that crossed the Alps to invade Italy, well, those mountains, not that specific mountain, but the mountain range that it belongs to, were there objectively offering Charles VIII an obstacle, but also the opportunity that if you cross the Alps, you can invade Florence, you can invade Rome, you can invade all these juicy Italian states with lots of money. Well, that mountain was there. And so therefore it has kept its identity. But what guarantees its identity? Is it, as Aristotle would say, a set of properties, a certain height, a certain mineral composition, a certain list of properties that tells you this is what the mountain is, this is the essence of a folded mountain, or is it something else? The same thing with the animals and plants that we see around here. I mean, we don't see zebras or tigers or anything, but we do see a bunch of animals. But let's imagine that we were in Africa and we saw zebras, and we saw right now a population of zebras moving along, and you went, well, so those are zebras, but what makes them zebras? Is it my concept of the zebra? In other words, am I creating zebras with my mind, or is it the essence of zebrahood? The essence of zebrahood being a list of properties, being horse-like, being herbivorous, having black and white stripes as camouflage, and so on, a bunch of properties. And that essence of zebrahood is what guarantees their identity. Well, that was the original answer 2,500 years ago, and Aristotle's, he's such a giant in the history of philosophy that answer survived until the 20th century. When you ask most non-materialist philosophers, if we could ask Baudrillard right now, if we could ask Kristeva right now, if we could ask Lyotard right now, we could ask Lacan right now, why aren't you a materialist? Why aren't you a realist? Somebody who believes in the mind independence of the world. The very first thing they would tell you is because we don't believe in essences. You know, essences are human creations, and because they're human creations, we are projecting them into the world, and that shows you that we are constructing the world with words that stand for essences. So given that was the answer that most, the Heidegger would give you, that Husserl would give you, well, the very first thing we need to get rid of is essences. Right? So I'm just going to put here, not essence. Essences would be the wrong answer to this word. So we're going to spend the rest of the class getting rid of essences. Why does it take 3 hours to get rid of essences? Because they are from Aristotle, for God's sakes. Aristotle is a giant. You can't just dismiss Aristotle. Aristotle dominated our thought for 2,500 years. He wrote what is perhaps the first piece of software that actually ran, called the syllogism. The syllogism might seem kind of boring to you. It starts with, all humans are mortal. I am human. And then the piece of software would automatically give you, I am mortal. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal, but 2,500 years ago, it was a big deal. Because he guaranteed with his mechanical recipe, and remember, there's nothing about software other than being a mechanical recipe. Computers need mechanical recipes, step-by-step defined, to produce effects, whether it's a word processor, whether it's a 3D program, whether it is a browser. It's specified by mechanical recipes. So the first inventor of the very first mechanical recipe that worked flawlessly, hell, that's a major figure. And so we cannot confront Aristotle just by saying, oh, well, he was Greek and he lived 2,500 years ago, so let's just forget about him. He needs to be confronted head on, just like we were going to confront Hegel head on tomorrow, and we're going to confront Kant head on today. We need to dedicate at least 3 hours to each of these thinkers, attacking them or critiquing them, because they are major thinkers and they have influenced everybody else, particularly in the 20th century. Let's begin with population thinking. Population thinking is a reasoning style that was invented in the 1930s to think about populations of animals and populations of plants, the kinds of populations that inhabit ecosystems. And it was born from bringing together the ideas of Darwin on natural selection with the ideas of Mendel on inheritable materials. Remember, in the 1930s, we had not discovered DNA, so we didn't really know what was the material that had the information needed for your kids to resemble you, right? for you to pass certain inheritable characteristics to your kids. We didn't know, but Mendel, who was a monk, had already done various experiments with simple plants in which he could tell you, look, if you cross this plant that doesn't have any spots in its leaves with this plant that has spots in its leaves, or that has a flower that's white and it has a flower that's red, then I can tell you what the kids are going to look like. And there's going to be some red, some white, and some that are mixed. And then if you cross these plants and these ones, I can tell you what's going to come out. So he was the first one to study inheritance, but in a systematic way. You put that together with Darwin's idea that animals need to compete for resources, although some animals also cooperate, symbiotic animals cooperate with one another, that from competition and cooperation, from predator and prey relationships, and symbiotic relationships such as insects have with plants that they pollinate, from those ecological relations, pressures emerge that guide the evolution of a particular species in one direction instead of another direction. For instance, guide the evolution of insects in the direction of cooperating with plants ever more closely, and guide the evolution of plants in the direction of producing nectar to attract insects, because they are the insects that are going to serve as your sexual organs. So when you put those two ideas together, you get population thinking. Well, let's make it more philosophical. Let's start giving some little formulas and explaining them. The first formula goes like this. Any population of variable replicators